All right. Well, you know what? We move on now. And Illinois is virtually bankrupt now. For years, the state has spent beyond its means and ignored the buildup of its unfunded obligations. And now they have, if you try to talk about balancing the budget, well, Illinois currently faces a real annual budget deficit of $14 to $15 billion. And joining us with some possible solutions is Eden Martin. He's going to tell us about how Illinois became broke. And again, he heads up the .com, if you will. IllinoisIsBroke.com. And Eden, thanks so much for stopping in and welcome. And Terry, why don't you fill us in on a couple of other things that Eden, he's a very busy man.
Eden Martin, his name is legendary with civic things in Chicago. He's head of the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club of Chicago. This is a group of top business leaders in a bipartisan way who've been facing up to this issue of Illinois being broke. I mean, I started writing about it a while ago. You, and back in 2006, issued a huge report. Nobody wanted to listen. Now we blithely say, yeah, hey, we're on the edge of bankruptcy. We're the worst state in the union for our budget deficit. What can we do?
Well, first thing we have to do is get to a balanced budget, which is easier to say than to do. And the place you start is by cutting costs. We have to reform the way we make the budget. We have to reform our retirement plans for state employees and members of the other state pension plans. The pensions are very, very costly, and there is a way to reform those to reduce the costs and at the same time protect the rights that people have already earned.
Tell us, because those rights are earned.
Well, let's start with the pensions and then we'll talk about retiree health. On the pensions, if you're an employee for the state of Illinois, depending on which plan you're in, you can retire at 60 or 55 with a full pension that's roughly 75% of your final average salary. In Chicago, you can do it at the age of 50. And you can do it with automatic COLA adjustments after you retire. The state, in the case of the state employees, pays 100% of their retiree health care costs, and that could be 10 years before you get to Medicare. Very costly.
Those are promises. Can you change those now for people who are currently working or for those who are already retired?
Yes, there is a promise, and you have to keep the promise. And for people who are retired, you cannot change the benefits. For people who have worked up until now, let's say 10 or 15 years and accrued certain rights, you have to protect those. There's plenty of case law that benefits that have been earned have to be retained. But prospectively, going forward, you can feather those down just as the private sector has had to do it because of economic pressures. Just like you can feather down or control wages or other terms of employment.
I would think, though, sometimes before you want to attack a problem like that, and I understand you look at some of the numbers, it's staggering. But if you talk about feathering something like that down, I imagine there's some other areas that you've identified that you'd prefer to feather down first.
Well, you go where the money is, and the big ticket items, we've got basically 130 billion, that's
with a B,
not an M, of retirement-related obligations in the state of Illinois at the state level that are unfunded. We've got additional billions at the city level and at the school board level. So it's a huge problem, and if you want to attack it, you have to go where the problem is, and it is in the retirement program.
Shouldn't those things have been funded all along?
Yes.
I mean, wasn't that the idea when you do something like that?
Yes, and Labor's right about that. One of the things that they say is if the state had funded these, we wouldn't have this problem. There's really two problems. One is that the pensions and the retiree health need to be reformed, and the cost can be reduced prospectively. But the other thing that has to be done is they have to be adequately funded, and they have not been, and that's the state's fault. And that's why we've got this $130 billion of overhang, and it's going up at 8.5% a year.
Now, that's a huge part of it, but there's the rest of the state budget. And you talk about cutbacks. Well, that hits home, with schools and other kinds of programs. Are you in favor, the Civic Committee, of a tax increase?
No, and here's why. If you had a tax increase right now, you wouldn't get the budget reforms and the cost cutting that you need to get.
And isn't it a Band-Aid? We keep raising taxes,
Absolutely.
And we're putting it into the same problem that we've had already.
No, the Band-Aid is in borrowing.
Right.
And borrowing is a tax on the future. And that's what we have done, and that's what it looks like we're going to continue to do, which is an avoidance of the problem. If you've got a household budget that's out of control, the first place you go is cut, even if it's painful. But we can't cut in Springfield because it would make somebody mad, so we don't do it. And taxes would make people mad, so what we do is we borrow, which is why we've got a $130 billion problem. And it's got to stop because there is no free lunch, and this is going to come to an end.
And as Terry said, we can't print money here in the state.
Exactly.
Eden, thanks so much for stopping by. We greatly appreciate it. Explaining some of these issues to us.
The website, IllinoisIsBroke.com. Go and read about it. These are real numbers, a real problem.